Very early here in the land of the midnight sun. So don't be surprised if there's quite a lot of editing that goes on as I stumble and fumble my way through this. But I want to have a look at why it is that rich people want more, and to get more they're even prepared to risk their entire lives by stealing, by thieving, by embezzlement. And why am I talking about this? Well, it's because of what's been happening recently with Peter Murrell and the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party. He has been, I think, or is about to be found guilty. He's pleaded guilty to the embezzlement, which is a legal term really for theft. The only difference is that with embezzlement, it's that you are given care of something which you abuse. But in common parlance, it is theft. And he was the national treasurer, I believe, of the SNP, and his wife was the leader of the SNP, and he stole £400,000 from the party funds over a period of time and used it to buy certain weird items. Now, the title of this is Why Do Rich People Steal? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, he wasn't rich. Well, I think we're getting a bit confused here, because I think that now we believe that being rich, we've been told to believe that being rich is being Elon Musk, who is close to a trillionaire. And we are exposed every day to all of the billionaires, the tech billionaires and the Trumps of this world who are making billions and billions of dollars. And we're now assuming that those are the people who are wealthy, and the rest of us are impoverished, deprived nobodies. But actually, in my opinion, Murrell and his wife, leader of the SNP, they were wealthy. They had an income of about, let's say, £250,000 a year. £250,000 a year. Plus, nearly all of their expenses were catered for. Now, where I come from, that's somebody who is wealthy. And I'm not interested in those people who say, I can't live in London because I'm earning under £200,000 a year. I just call bullshit on all that. They were wealthy. They were well-to-do. They didn't worry in week 3 of the month whether or not their card would work in Lidl. Get real. So here was what I consider to be a rich man. So what did he do? Well, he spent an extra £400,000 of someone else's money in order to furnish his house and his life with these rather peculiar luxuries. The sort of luxuries that most of us are unaware of, but do exist in the world. You really have to go to the 3rd floor at Harrods if you want to buy a fountain pen that costs £4,000 or £5,000 or £10,000. You really need to go to a sort of premium boutique shop to buy some of these items. But of course, he didn't just buy these things. He also used Amazon a lot and purchased kind of everyday things with someone else's money. Now, the headlines will tell you that he bought a motorhome for about 125 grand, and he bought a Jaguar for 81,000. Those are kind of the headline things. But he also bought robotic lawnmower. He bought like ladders that cost over £1,000. He bought famously 3 coffee machines, and now I think we're getting to the heart of it. Here is a man who has the money to buy a coffee machine, who doesn't just buy 1 premium coffee machine, but buys 3, the total cost of which well over £3,000, £4,000, £5,000. In fact, it may have been even more than that. I think they were about a couple of thousand each. He spent thousands of pounds on sort of luxurious stationery and pens and garden equipment. He made £380 purchases through Amazon. He made another 250 additional purchases online. That means that he was getting, 500 or 600 deliveries over this period of a few years. Excuse me. A man or a woman knocking at the door with a great big parcel of some relatively high value product. Now his wife, the leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, she says that she has nothing to do with that. And I'm not going to make any comments about that. And it goes on, where they bought luxury watches, he paid all his parking tickets. The point is, he stole repeatedly. Here's a man who has things that most of us would dream of, financial stability, a substantial income, full expenses paid, but that goes on to risk everything in order to furnish himself with even more. And I think that it's worth talking about why rich people like him would do such a thing. I mean, what's really going on? We've seen him in court, and he's going to make a statement next week, and it'll be interesting to see what account he gives of himself. I mean, we can just sort of off the cuff try and fathom a guess. Maybe he'll say, I lost touch with reality. That could be one of his reasons. I mean, he's going to defend himself, obviously. He's going to try and make himself look as good as possible. He wants to mitigate the offence because he wants the punishment to be as light as possible. I lost touch with reality. That could be one. He could say that he was suffering from depression and that this theft over a long period of time that was kind of ridiculous in a way. Now we can see it transparently. He might be thinking that it was a manifestation of a terrible mental illness. But that's not going to wash, is it? Let's be honest. For lots of reasons. It was over a long period of time, and it doesn't make any sense because, if you were suffering from some form of depression or mania even, then yes, you might buy things, but you don't necessarily need to put your hands in someone else's bank account to do so. And I've always wondered why it is that this sort of rich people they never seem to be able to be satisfied with what they have. Whereas I think that should we call it the average person, what they want from life is just a kind of financial security. And that's their dream in a way. I think most people, are not worried about whether or not they can get their hands on a £5,000 fountain pen and 3 coffee machines. But most people would dream and work hard towards a degree of financial stability in their life. And we know what that means. So why is it that wealthy people, they can't stop? And this isn't about that they can't stop making and accumulating money, because that's maybe their hobby, their drive, whatever, who knows. But this is about theft, and this is quite common. Well, there are various things that come to mind, aren't there? And this is called white-collar crime, basically. And it's often people who've got themselves into a position of authority. And I wonder, because I've never had a position of authority, so I'm guessing, but I think that when you reach a certain point, when people are, in deference to you a lot of the time, then it's possible you kind of feel that the rules don't apply to you. Now, maybe this is what happened to Boris Johnson and his cabinet when they were disobeying COVID rules and having parties. The rules don't apply to you. You are issuing rules. You are not receiving rules. And maybe that gets into your skin and soaks into your very soul. The idea that you are kind of elevated above ordinary people. And also maybe you feel that you, Peter Murrell, and other rich people who steal feel that they have, they've made some form of special sacrifice. They are a special chosen person. They have worked hard to reach a elevated, can I say, godly position, which means that not only do the rules not apply to them, but that they have made these Christ-like sacrifices and they must be rewarded with special privilege. And those special privileges they apply to themselves. They maybe feel that the world owes them more than they have given. I don't know. In other words, they're making a moral account of themselves and they're filling in the books wrong. They're saying, I have given so much of myself. You do not realise how difficult it's been to get to the top of this political game. And now I'm going to reward myself because you aren't. You're paying me your measly £125,000 salary plus full expenses. But I have sacrificed 20 years of my life. In fact, that's exactly what Nigel Farage said recently. He's been questioned about the £5 million that was deposited into his bank account for no reason whatsoever. It was just a personal, it was like a birthday present in an envelope. You know, like I would send my daughter, 20 quid for her birthday. He received £5 million. And he can't justify it in any way. And he's tried to. And when asked recently how he did justify that gift, he said it was a reward for 25 years of sacrifice in bringing about Brexit. Now, he calls it 25 years of sacrifice. I actually think it's an extremely well-paid job that he had. He was paid by many different organisations, including the European Parliament, to do a job. Now, I've been doing a job for 25 years. Where's my 5 million in an envelope? Where's my 5 million? Now, I don't feel entitled to it because I know how the world works, but he doesn't. Anyway, it's also possible that this is something that happened over a few years and started in a fairly small way. It could have been that he spent, 10 euros on a packet of private post-it notes, and it could have gone from there. And he could have thought at the beginning, I'll buy this lawnmower because I need it. I'll use that because, and then, he realizes that he's crossed a boundary, and his brain normalizes it over time. Maybe this is what happened a little bit to Bernie Madoff. When Bernie Madoff first paid out a dividend using other clients' money in his investment trust, which nearly collapsed the American economy, it was so severe, he probably did it on the basis that it was manageable, it was technically illegal, but it didn't matter, and this continued over a period of time until Madoff had kind of normalised this theft, this illegality in his own mind. It is possible, I think, to do that. And this might be why, if you look at the long list of things that Murrell bought with other people's money, many of them are really kind of mundane, like, as I said, the parking tickets and the stationery, that kind of thing. But must have just kind of thought that this is normal and there was no moral friction within him. It could be that, it's nothing to do with acquisition, it's nothing to do with money, it's nothing to do with the things themselves, that they have got themselves into this peculiar situation where they are wanting to acquire things because it gives them some kind of sense of control, it gives them a dopamine hit, and that they feel that they are somehow entitled to this, that the rules don't apply to them. And of course, the other thing about rich people is that they are insulated from the world that you and I live in. We live in a world where we are very vulnerable actually. Not only are we vulnerable to financial collapse, and we're vulnerable to the economics of the world and things that are outside of ourselves, we're also limited by what we can do and what we can say. And as I've said before, rich people don't have this problem. They can do and say anything because they have the means, financial, to protect themselves. Now, Felix Dennis, who was the publisher of Oz magazine in Australia, is probably the kind of archetype, in my opinion, of this attitude. So here was a guy who was publishing sort of radical hippie kind of magazines and was and he was just a hippie, and he was producing these kind of fanzines. But it was a time, that time has come back, but it was a time when this was not tolerated by the authorities and the powers that be in the governments, and people like that would be run out of the country. And, this is in the late 60s and 70s. There are many great artists and writers and publishers who have been forced to leave their home nation because they have been pursued so violently by the authorities. I mean, Genesis P. Orange of Throbbing Gristle, for example, John Lydon, many others, okay, and Felix Dennis was one of these. So Felix Dennis was pursued through the courts and had house raided, and he realised that, if he wanted to be who he was and say the things he wanted to say and do the things he wanted to do, he had to have the money and the resources to fight back. So he thought, I will accumulate wealth, but I'll do it not to kind of dilute what I believe, but to reinforce the things that I believe in a way, and to be able to do it so that I can fight back against these authorities. And wealthy people can always fight back. Someone like Elon Musk or that ilk is basically untouchable. And it's just because he has the resources to fight. So these people are insulated. And it could be, bringing back the SNP case, it could be that they live in a bubble. Murrell lived in a total bubble. Imagine being at home. Your wife is the leader. You're outside of you're outside of the kind of reality of the law and of rules to some extent, or you feel it. You're never challenged in your day-to-day work. You are managing everything. You are managing the money. You are implicitly trusted. And you're surrounded by yes people. And why are people like that surrounded by yes people? It's quite simple. It's because we all need to survive. And one of the best ways to survive is to get close to people who've got money and power. And this is what's happening in the White House, and this is what happens in day-to-day life. If somebody moves into the village who's got a lot of money, it's quite nice to be pally with them. Who knows what they might offer you? Somebody who's dripping in cash. It could just be €1,000 to paint the front door. Who knows? But people like to get close and they want to say the right thing. And so he was surrounded by that. And probably thought he was too important and too smart to get caught. But as I said, it's interesting because he's going to make a statement, I think, next week. Or he might not. He might just just keep quiet about it. But he's got the opportunity, I think, to make a statement during his sentencing next week. And it would be interesting to say what he says. This goes on all of the time. And there is a kind of spectrum of white-collar corruption, if you like, or official corruption. You expect to find that possibly in somewhere like Albania more than you would do, say, in Norway, because they have a different transparency law and they have quite strict punishments for officials who abuse their positions. So it's very difficult to do so. In the UK, we have lots of checks and balances on MPs doing this kind of thing. But of course, there are many, many cases where they have been found to have abused the system for personal gain. You see it in corporate expenses. You see it in people who are involved with kind of pseudo charities. You see it in the misuse of funds in unions and that kind of, charitable organisations. And you see it a lot in kind of even in small town councils. A lot of people doing favours for one another, little backhanders here and there. And as I said, it happens more in some places than it does in other. But the point is, when there is a kind of a loose arrangement, when there is something which is opaque, then people will get away with what they can. I mean, it's just human life to some extent. What's happened to all those coffee machines? What's happened to the 500 or 600 parcels he received from Amazon during those few years to that family house? Where are they? I guess many of them are in the skip or in the loft or have just kind of rotted away. He didn't need any of that stuff. So why did he do it? Well, his entire boundaries, the boundaries that you and I have to kind of carry with us wherever we go, had completely eroded at this stage. He must have had some form of sense of entitlement. And maybe it even became a kind of coping mechanism in that strange bubble he was living. I don't know. Maybe he will explain himself. Somehow he was unhappy, and he kind of maybe thought that these things were going to be the key to unlocking his unhappiness. I don't know for sure, but I'll be interested to see what he has to say for himself. Thank you.